In the United States, the FDA lists cannabis as a Schedule 1 drug, meaning that there's a high potential for abuse and no clinical benefit. But a new review from the FDA has shown that there is medical benefits, and they are suggesting that there be a rescheduling. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. So as many of you know, I am a medical marijuana certifying physician here in Florida. I was involved at the very beginning, one of the first physicians to get this certification, but I was also involved with the Office of Medical Marijuana Use in terms of helping them set their policies as well as the regulations. So I've been really involved in all of this for quite some time now. In Florida, it started in 2016 when the law came through. Now, in addition to that, as you know, as just a practitioner of holistic health, of integrative health, I've been using natural supplements for 25 years now. So I came into this whole thing with a lot of experience on how to use non-regulated and non-FDA approved treatments to help people out. Okay, so today we're going to talk about this FDA and the different schedules that there are. We're going to talk about what the status of medical marijuana legality is, but we're also going to talk about this new FDA report that kind of blows a lot of this out of the water. So it's pretty interesting. Now, let's first talk about what the FDA scheduling is. So there is this list of schedules. The highest one is Schedule 1. And what that means is, as I had mentioned, is that there is no current medical use, there's no medical benefit, and there's a high potential for abuse of the treatment. Now, also as well as a potential for addiction, I should say. These include things such as heroin, ecstasy, LSD, quaaludes, and peyote, and cannabis. Schedule 2 drugs are drugs with some medically accepted uses, but with a high potential for abuse or addiction, such as fentanyl, morphine, codeine, even Ritalin and Adderall. Those can certainly be problems too. Okay, Schedule 3 means that there's moderate or low potential for physical or psychological dependence, and that would be things like Tylenol with codeine, ketamine, anabolic steroids, testosterone. So still controlled substances. All of these are controlled substances. Only a physician with a DEA license would be allowed to prescribe a controlled substance, one of these scheduled substances. Now, in terms of the legality of medical marijuana, and certainly this started first out west in California and made its way, and now there are 38 states, plus Washington, D.C. in our country, where medical marijuana is legal. In Florida, it first happened with CBD in 2014. And that was based upon law that was passed by our legislation. And then a constitutional amendment was voted on by all of us to allow for THC, for regular marijuana, to be allowed for medical purposes as well. And as you may know, it passed very strongly with 70% approval amongst the voting population. Now, what then happened is that so of course it is still illegal on a federal level, and we're not talking about recreational. Of course, there's even what's happening on the federal level. This is not impacting the designation of recreational. We're talking specifically about medical. Although, of course, in other states, it has become recreational, but that's not what we're talking about here. So as far as what happened, and so in 2016, relative to the federal policy, that was the last time a petition came forward to reduce the schedule from a Schedule 1 to lower down for cannabis. It was rejected back in 2016. But then in 2022, President Biden asked the Department of Health and Human Services, which is under the FDA, they asked them to, as well as the U.S. Attorney General, to review expeditiously, fast, right, how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. So obviously, in our president's mind, it's wrong the way it's currently scheduled. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked. Now, so in August of 2023, so just about 5 months ago, if you're watching this in January, the FDA sent a 252-page summary, a report to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA. It is ultimately the DEA who makes the determination as to the rescheduling. These other agencies, like, from the Health Human Services, the FDA, they make recommendations to it, but the DEA makes the final call. Okay. And what this report said was that cannabis is a low risk threat to the population. It poses less potential for misuse than drugs listed in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, which including the medications that I mentioned. It then went on to say that evidence clearly showed, yes, some people are using cannabis in an amount sufficient to create a hazard to their health or to the safety of others. But they said the vast majority of people who use cannabis are doing so in a manner that does not lead to dangerous outcomes to themselves or others. Okay. And then what they did is the recommendation was to reschedule it from a 3 down to a 1. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the implications of that would be. But the recommendations was based at looking at over the medical records of over 30,000 healthcare providers and 6 million patients in order to gather this data. So a very, very large number of people were part of this. And these were all people who were using medical marijuana within their state's programs. Okay. And so the FDA then assessed some of the most commonly used medical purposes, like the diagnoses that states are approving for people to receive medical cannabis. Things like anorexia, so people who don't eat, whether that's from cancer, HIV, etc., epilepsy, anxiety, inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, nausea and vomiting, pain, and PTSD. And certainly all of those things are part of the qualifying diagnosis here in Florida. And what they then did is they concluded that the absolute strongest evidence, the no-brainer, was for pain, and in particular neuropathic, neurologically based pain. But certainly we know it helps in other pain too. The largest body of evidence was actually, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The strongest evidence was for anorexia, for nausea, vomiting, and pain related to like chemo and those types of things. But the largest body of evidence, the most research, was relative to the pain for the neuropathic pain. So I want to make sure I got that right. But both of them were felt to be definitely significant findings, which for once and for all means the FDA has stated there is medical benefits to medical cannabis, which by definition would mean it's no longer a Schedule 1. Now, in assessing the harms and benefits, it actually used alcohol as a comparator, which was very interesting. I've done that before. I've done that with nicotine as well. They do say that up to 40 to 50% who use it regularly can experience physical dependence. I've talked about this before. That's not surprising. Why? It's not fixing the root cause of the problem. It's alleviating the symptom. So just like if ibuprofen was working to take away a person's pain, if you stop taking it, they would have their symptoms come back. They were physically dependent on it. Of course, one shouldn't be taking ibuprofen long term, but from the information we have, it is safe to use medical cannabis long term. Okay, so they do also conclude that if there are any side effects associated with it, it's almost always mild. Things like irritability, difficulty sleeping, anxiety, and restlessness. Symptoms that if cannabis was stopped would go away. They also said that some people can experience depression, physical discomfort, sweating, and headaches. Again, that would go away. Now, they did find, and comment about cannabis use disorder, which is where people go on to more serious types of side effects. Most commonly, it's with like excessive vomiting and some other things as well. But there is a true psychological dependence there, and that they say is about 10 to 20% of people. But they also did say that relative to tobacco, opiates, and alcohol, much less of that happening. Okay, so now what happens next? Well, first of all, the DEA does not have to do anything. They could just sit on it. They don't have to take this recommendation, accept anything. They can just go on their business. But the lawyers who have been involved in this and who are the ones who put the petition in, they see that's going to move pretty quickly. And they are expecting, although nothing, of course, happens till it happens, but they're expecting a move from a Schedule 1 down to a Schedule 3. And let's face it, based upon that definition, makes more sense as to where it would be at. Now, they did also point out in this whole thing that, since alcohol and tobacco are not scheduled, they don't need a prescription, right? So that's going to be kind of an interesting thing because obviously, here in Florida, we don't prescribe cannabis. We certify that a patient is authorized. Part of that is because of this FDA ruling. And one of the things about Schedule 1 drugs, we as physicians, even if we have a DEA number, we can't prescribe that. We can only prescribe 2 down. Okay, so just to clarify that point from before. Now, I do think that this is a really good move in the right direction. Okay. again, part of the problem with Schedule 1 drugs, and to me this is the biggest problem, you can't do any research on it. You can't open up research the way that any of those other medicines are done. So I realize that there is a concern, especially amongst certain physicians, patients, people in the cannabis industry. What will happen is this going to get big pharma involved. And probably to a certain extent, but I also don't know that big pharma is going to get involved more in big agriculture. Maybe big ag will. But the thing is this, big pharma wants to standardize things, right? They want to do research to try to find the constituents, the combinations, the dosings that work right. So I would imagine that they're going to be focusing much more on oral products, possibly topical products, but I expect that they're going to focus more on oral products and inhaled products. But who knows? I can't say that for sure. Maybe they will. Down here we do have a meter dose inhaler like an asthma puffer, so who knows? Maybe they will move into that. But I see them doing things more in the oral sublingual tincture kind of mode. Okay, now if you can't do research on it, how are we supposed to do it to know what we're doing here? So again, that'll be important because as of right now, there's only one strain of some pretty low potency cannabis, like nothing that people are using from the dispensaries, and you get it from, I forget if it's University of Mississippi or Mississippi State, but it's an apples to oranges comparison to what's out there anyway, so it really wouldn't be helpful, that type of research. Now, as I said, I would love to see this research at such a level. Hey, in Israel, they have figured out, and they're building a database where they match the genetics of cannabis to the genetics of tumors, of cancer cells. And they're able to find that the genetics of certain cannabis can treat certain tumors, but other strains, other cultivars, if you will, where the genetics are different, that doesn't happen. Okay, so of course, there's another issue here regarding on the federal level versus the state. And that is most states already have an active working medical program set by the state. And each state has their own rules. How they get it, what qualifies, how much you're allowed to get. And so I can see that being a big challenge if the feds want to try to standardize all of that, because there are all these states that are doing things differently already. And already we know that this has been deemed by the federal government a states' right issue. So even coming back to use of cannabis, even though the selling of medical cannabis would be illegal right now at the FDA level because it's Schedule 1 and you can't prescribe it, but also the going back to Attorney General Holder, also to the last administration, it's been consistently said that if a state has a legal program, the federal agents are not going after that state. So in the 12 other states, maybe that will be a problem. I know there are new ones are coming on board all the time, but that would be it. So that's another reason why I think that the federal government is not going to get overly involved on the state level, because that's kind of the way we've seen that that the federal government and the Supreme Court has been ruling anyway. So in that particular situation, probably in our benefit that we'll be able to keep the robust programs that we have. But then again, hey, what do I know? I'm just a guy who makes observations, although a lot of times they turn out right. Well, there you go. I hope you share this information with other people, but I do think of this as a big step forward. And of course, the real step is going to happen if the DEA does the formal reschedule. Have a nice day.